Hey, everybody. My name is Rob Phelan. I'm also known as the FI Educator Online. And I'm here today with Jordan Grumet, who is going to be talking to us about the different pathways you can take to financial independence. Now, Jordan is a full-time medical professional who's still working in the medical field, right, Jordan?
Yep, I'm a
Okay.
hospice doctor.
Still working as a hospice doctor, is the host of the podcast Earn and Invest. So a personal finance podcast where you can learn more about money from a different voice than myself or your teacher or any of the other podcasts hosts that you've heard of so far, and is the author of the book Taking Stock. And the reason I'm bringing Jordan on today is that we want to talk about the pathway you take to financial independence. So how are you going to go from where you are today to where you want to be in the future, particularly through a financial lens? And Jordan's experience as a hospice doctor gives us this very unique perspective of meeting a lot of people who are at the end of their lives and getting to ask them, what would you do differently next time? How would you have changed the approach you took? And most of us don't get to have that insight until we're there ourselves or until we have a loved one who is at that point. So this is a great opportunity for us to get that perspective without having to, have someone we love being at death's door right now. So Jordan, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your wisdom and your experience with us. This is going to be a really cool conversation to have. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and I'm happy to be here and discuss what I think are really important topics, especially when you're young. We sometimes put these things off until we're much older. And like you said, I work with dying patients, right? So they start thinking about these things when they know they have 6 months or less to live. And it's really cool to start thinking about them when you're much younger, maybe even before you start your career.
And I know this will come up at some point in our conversation, but that feeling of planning for tomorrow versus living for today, when that question comes up, well, I don't know how much time I got left. I mean, I could die tomorrow. Like, why do I need to care about saving for 30 years in the future? Why shouldn't I just live my life today and just kind of do it one day at a time? So I definitely want to try and address that question at some point. But the other ones I want you to think about if you're watching the replay are the student reflection document that comes with this. The first question on it was, before Jordan and I get into this presentation, what do you think would be a good or a great or the best pathway to get to financial independence? So from your personal finance classrooms, from your experience, from talking to your family, friends, if you were to try and reach financial independence, which for the purpose of this conversation is the point where you would no longer have to work, you would have enough in your investments and in passive income that you could decide that work was optional and you could cover all of your life's expenses through that. If you wanted to get to that point, how would you do it? And what do you think would be the best pathway for you to do that? I want you to write that down before we start, or at least think about it if you're watching this replay. And then as we go through this conversation, check that belief, that value, and see, is that something that's still true, or do you want to adjust that as you move forward after this conversation? All right. So Jordan, you had a story that you told on your podcast, which really resonated with me. And I really would love for you to share that story again. It's the story of the three brothers. And I think this is going to be a great hook for this conversation and the direction we want to go. Would you mind sharing the story with us?
Sure. And the thing I'll say, even before I get started, this is the parable of the three brothers. And it's really a parable about how we structure our careers, maybe about how we structure our finances. But I'd also like you to think about how you structure your relationships, your hobbies, the important things in life. So this is the parable of the three brothers. There was once three very different brothers who set off on the journey of a lifetime by embarking on three separate roads. Because each brother was unique, these roads diverged quickly. The eldest brother was considered the wisest, so it was unsurprising that he chose a path that was straight and clear of clutter. The middle brother was a strong walker, but easily distracted. There were many detours along the way. He had trouble concentrating on the task at hand. And finally, the youngest brother was known to be lighthearted and frivolous. He neither moved forward too quickly nor got distracted too easily. He was just slow, deliberate. The eldest brother. The eldest of the three brothers had a concrete goal in mind because he had no fondness for his road. He never enjoyed hiking. He saw the end as a destination, a culmination of his struggles. His thirst for finishing was so great that he often skipped meals and sleep to plod farther along. The eldest brother suffered greatly but made significant progress in a short period of time. His physical fatigue and emotional weakness were buoyed by his dreams of all the things he could accomplish once he reached his destination. If he could only get there faster, he would be free to travel to foreign lands, or even better, to climb the highest mountains. These dreams were the steam in his engine, the gas in his car. When he finally came to the end of his journey, he did indeed enjoy a long period of freedom. Although the road had battered him both mentally and physically, it was a sacrifice he was more than willing to make. The middle brother. The middle of the three brothers also wasn't overly fond of his particular road, but he lacked the strength and determination of the eldest brother. He thus decided to split his journey into more manageable increments. When he found his energy running low, he would follow a flight of fancy into the fields or up a mountain. Although these trips off the prescribed path lengthened the middle brother's journey and cost him in terms of time, he found his joy refreshed and his stamina rebuilt with each and every extracurricular foray. It was many years after the eldest brother that the middle brother reached the end of his road. He had less time to enjoy his new freedom, but a good deal more energy. And finally, the youngest brother. The youngest brother was much slower and more deliberate than his elders. In fact, he loved to hike. So instead of looking at the road as a destination, he saw the path as a joyful journey. He took time to notice the trees and the rivers, the seasons changing, and the sun beating down on his face. He felt no hurry. When he finally reached his destination, years and years after the eldest or the middle brother, he did something that neither of his other brothers could understand. He turned around and walked back the way he came. So my question for all of you today is, which brother are you?
Okay, so story of our three brothers. The first, went straight for the destination, no detours, didn't even really slow down, skipped meals, skipped rest to get there as fast as possible, had the most time. And we think of what this represents. This represents the journey to financial independence in this conversation. So if we think about financial independence as that point where you no longer need to work, you've built the passive income streams, you have saved and invested the money you need to cover all your expenses. Now we can say, we've done it. We're there. Work is optional. Now we have time to spend at our leisure, doing whatever we want to do. It could be to make more money via work. It could be to pursue hobbies, interests. It could be to travel. It could be to spend time with family. There's so many different things that you could do, particularly when you have gotten there so fast that you now have a long period of your life left to still do this. But we know that the journey took its toll. And there could be mental tolls, there could be physical tolls. We've had conversations with other speakers who have come on and talked to us about the mental impact sometimes and the sacrifice that comes with pursuing financial independence really fast like this. The middle brother, kind of a hybrid of the two extremes, wanted to get there pretty fast, but also took time along the way to stop, go on detours. It's like my dad taking us on a road trip, and every time he sees a sign, he's like, "Oh, that's interesting. Let's just veer off here and take another hour or two off of this trip." Hated it as a kid, but in hindsight now, maybe he had the right idea. So you get there slower. You feel a bit more refreshed every time you get back on the path because you've taken this break. But at the end, you have less time left to just kind of say, "I'm financially independent," and to do what you want at that point. And then the last one's the most curious one. Like, really did not rush at all. Just kind of said, like, I'm going to work the entire lifespan. We'll call it that, because we never really get off the path. So we're working the entire time, but really enjoy the pathway along the way. So just kind of said life is there to be enjoyed it the whole way. And does he ever actually reach financial independence, would we say? Or just kind of is always on that journey to accumulating more?
Well, that's the question. And that's actually a big question in the parable. You see, often we think of financial independence in a few different ways, right? We think of it as having enough money that you can invest that money and never work again and then live off that money. That's one way we think of financial independence. Another way we think of financial independence is having enough passive income. So let's say you own real estate and you collect rents every month. Once you have enough of those rents you collect to pay for your lifestyle, then you're kind of financially independent, even though you may still be young, even though you might not have a huge net worth or have a lot of money saved up. I want to broaden the conversation. When we talk about the youngest brother, I'm going to say that being financially independent actually is having enough money to do what you really want to do that fulfills a sense of purpose or passion in your life. So, in a sense, the youngest brother, it's the longest road to retirement, right? Being at that place where you never have to work again. But it might be the quickest road to financial independence. Because if we define financial independence as living that life that is you're both passionate about and have enough money to sustain, if you're the youngest brother and you do something you love, if you love walking on that trail and you love hiking and that's how you want to spend your time, and doing that provides you enough money to support yourself, in a sense, you're financially independent from day one. And I think that's what the real nuance to this conversation, the parable of the three brothers is often when we talk about money and finances, we forget that money is not really a goal. Our finances or even financial independence isn't really a goal. It's a tool to live the lives we want to live. And so we got to be really thoughtful about what kind of life we want to live, even before we start looking at our finances, even before we start deciding which path is right for us. The question is, what are we using that money as a tool to achieve? What kind of life do we want to live? Once we know who we want to be and what we want to do, something that's not easy for teenagers nor adults. It takes a lot of thought. But once we have some inkling of the kind of people we want to be, then we can start looking at these paths and divine which one is best for us.
Yeah, it's not really a parable like, say, the story of the three little pigs, where there was this like moral at the end that one of them was the right path and the other two were incorrect. It's not as easy. And I want to challenge you here. I was thinking of this while you were saying it. Can we create a fourth brother who represents the average American? So the fourth brother would be the one who is walking a pathway, has no clue where they're going, didn't pull out a map, didn't think about the destination, and ends up aimlessly wandering for most of their lives until their body breaks down and they realize they didn't get anywhere.
So that path actually is the path that I most experience in my work as a hospice doctor. And why I've started thinking more deeply about these things is when patients come to me in hospice and we diagnose them with some horrible disease and say you have only 6 months to live, they realize that they've been living that path, the path, what we could call the path of the fourth brother. And then they only have weeks or months to try to really put their life together and figure out what they really wanted and is any of that achievable or attainable. So I think, unfortunately, that's actually the path that most of us take when we're not thinking about what's important or purposeful in our life. And my goal, especially with young people, is to say, don't wait until maybe it's not when you're dying on hospice, but don't wait till you're infirm or too old to do the things you want, or maybe even encumbered by other responsibilities. Being intentional and thoughtful about what's important to you now will then allow us to build a financial framework that can actually support that future and those plans.
And the other side of this is that, we imagine this parable that there is an end point to this journey that they are all trying to get to. And the actual thing is that the end point is different for all three brothers. They all probably want different things out of life and what they want their financial independence journey to look like. And that can change along the journey. And this is what's really big for us teens, is that you don't have to figure out what you want your entire life to look like right now. Like, I'm not saying let's plot a course and you stick to that course for the rest of your life. It's just, what do you want life to look like today? What do you want it to look like in a year's time? So if you think forward a year from now, particularly those of you who are seniors and maybe looking at graduating, and you're going to step into the next part of your life where it's a little less predictable. High school, you're turning up next year. It's going to look very similar to what it looked like this year. But if you're in that transition point of finishing high school, what does life look like a year from now? What do you see yourself doing? Do you see income coming in? How do you see yourself spending your money? What are you doing with your free time? What are you doing with the time that's dictated to you? And then go 5 years into the future. What do you think might happen? 10, 15, 20. And it's a hard exercise to do. It's not easy, but if you could imagine what you wanted life to look like, then you can start thinking about, okay, what is the course I can set for myself to get there? And every year, 6 months, 5 years, you just you reevaluate. You're like, okay, let's do this exercise again. Do I still want to be in those spots in that time frame, or has it changed? Because I promise you, the person you are now at 15 to 18 years old, your needs, your wants, your goals, those are all going to change dramatically as you go through your late teens, early 20s into your 30s. And that's okay. Like, you will change your life's goals. The career ambitions you had when you were 5 years old are very different to what you have now. Being a superhero is no longer on the list for most of you. So it's okay to readjust and change your pathway as you go. All right. So, Jordan, I do really want to get into the hospice work that you have done and the lessons you've brought up in your book. Can you give us some highlights? Like, what are some of the biggest? I want to start with regrets, I guess. Let's start with what are some of the biggest regrets people have in terms of the life they've lived, and in particular around finances.
So interestingly enough, almost no one regrets that they didn't work more nights or weekends. Almost no one regrets that they didn't accumulate a certain amount of wealth, right? It's not the thing they think about when they're on their deathbeds. Generally, what people really regret is that they had something that was of deep importance to them and they never felt they had the energy, courage, or time to address that, so they didn't. And so that's what I think ends up being a huge regret. And it's really variable because all of us have different things that are important to us. So for some person, it might be a big goal like writing a book. For someone else, it might be fixing a relationship that went wrong years ago and they never got back to it. For other people, it even may be something like a job title or a degree. For each of us, it varies. But what we regret is that we had this thing in our life, this thing that felt purposeful, or this thing that was passionate about, and we kept on putting it off. And often we put it off because we worry about making money, or we worry about building a career. Often as we get older, we worry about what society tells us we're supposed to be. And so we push away those things that we really yearn to do. And I think especially when you're young, you're closer to those ages when you didn't worry about money, right? When we were little kids, we kind of did those things that just stimulated us and excited us. And a lot of times we didn't have that embarrassment that adults have of just doing something that's joyful or playful or interesting. We kind of lose that. And a lot of young people start losing that when they go to college, they get into their careers, they start concentrating on money and building wealth and even building job titles. And a lot of times they lose those deeper, more important things to them. And that comes back. If you don't address it, it tends to come back, especially when all of a sudden you're told, well, there's a limit now to how much life you have, right? So the lens changes when you're given a terminal diagnosis. And that's what people regret. They regret never being a better version of themselves or pursuing those things that were deeply important to them. Because they didn't think they had enough time or energy or money or whatever it is.
Oof, that word someday is a very hard one. What's on your list that you have the word someday afterwards or before? Like someday I will do this. Someday I'll learn that. Someday I'll go here. And if you don't put a date on that someday, it can just end up being that day that never approaches until you realize, actually, you know what? There isn't enough time to do that. When you said that we put off these someday items for concerns about the immediate future, so say school, money, getting into college, like are these valid concerns? Like, are we saying like in the moment that is the right decision to make, but in hindsight, like, we wish we could have done better, but we know in our heart like that was still the right thing to do? Or are we saying like, no, we actually didn't make the right decisions? Like, you shouldn't be as focused on these things. They're not that important. Like, what are we saying here?
Well, here's the thing. Yes, we should defer gratification, right? So maybe some of us don't want to study 8 hours on a Sunday to do well on a test or to get a degree or to do all these things that are hard, but we know ultimately that that will lead us to maybe a job we'll enjoy or even making enough money to spend that money in a way we like. So deferring gratification isn't bad. The problem is, and this is really a problem, we're so afraid of looking at what those some days are that we don't address them. And there's a myriad of reasons. One reason is that we're just afraid we're going to fail, right? Going after your dreams or pursuing those things that are deeply important to you, it's painful enough that it's much easier to say, well, I don't have time for that. I got to go to my job. I've got to save money. I've got to do all these things. It's much easier to concentrate on those than to look in the face that thing that's incredibly important for you and come to this conclusion that you may not succeed. Or even more importantly, maybe you don't know what your someday is. You don't know what purpose looks like in your life. And it's really hard to sit back and evaluate what purpose means like in your life and what living a good life looks like. And so because it's painful, because it's difficult, because it's much easier to do what everyone tells you, which is go to college, get a good job, make lots of money, we focus on those things because it's easier. And in a sense, I think this is feels like a little bit of stretch to people, but I think it's really true. And after dealing with dying people a lot, I've really realized a lot of times thinking about what's deeply important to us, what's really purposeful, or thinking about our some days reminds us that life is finite, that we don't have forever on this earth. And I think that scares the heck out of people. And so instead of putting thought and energy into that, we just put it off. And we don't just put it off for today or tomorrow. Often we put it off for decades, and a life goes by and you don't even think about these things. I think the better way to do it is to start thinking about what your some days are today. What does purpose look like in your life? And then instead of waiting until you're financially where you want to be to pursue those, what if we could take these things that are important to us and then via the parable of the three brothers, start actually working these things into our financial pathway? And that's where the magic happens. I want everyone listening to this to be incredibly financially successful, but we've always made it an either or thing. It's either you go and do the traditional thing, make lots of money and are successful, or you go after your passion and put all that aside. What I think we need to start doing is start figuring out what our passions are now and then build that into our financial framework so that we also can be incredibly financially successful.
I can't agree more. And I think one thing you really said that resonated with me was that idea of being scared of actually considering going after our someday items. I think there's just something to having a dream, and it's always that thing that kind of lights you up and be like, yeah, someday I'll do that. And then if you chase that dream and it doesn't happen, well, then what? What happens then? Or what happens when you achieve your dream? Like, are you done? Like, no, of course not. There will be more dreams. There'll be more things that you'll come up with, but finding the courage to chase those and potentially not make it is hard. It's very, go on.
I was just going to say, so I can give you tons of stories about this, but my experience is when people are on their deathbeds, they don't regret that thing that was important to them that they didn't achieve. They regret that thing that they didn't try for. So I'll give you a perfect example. I had a patient that I took care of. His name was Ernesto, and Ernesto was in his 20s and he was in the midst of corporate America, and he was killing it. Like, he was doing great. He was moving up. He was getting job promotions. And at the age of 28, he decided to do something no one could understand. He actually took a year off, took a sabbatical, went and trained, and then went to try to climb Mount Everest. It was really, really important to him. It was something he always wanted to do. And he figured, if not now, then when? So I met Ernesto in his 40s and he was dying of leukemia. And we, as the hospice team, came into his house and helped him get comfortable and helped take care of him. And all he could tell the hospice nurses about was his attempt to climb Mount Everest. And guess what? He never made it. Like, they made it about halfway up. The weather changed. It wasn't safe anymore. And they had to go back down. But years later, when he was on his deathbed, what really mattered to him was that he was in the arena. Like, he was there fighting the fight. No, he didn't succeed. He didn't get to the top of Everest, but that's what fulfilled him. And so I think we have to let go of this worry about succeeding or not. One day when you get to the end, I don't think you're going to be worried about whether you succeeded at those things that were really important to you. It was whether you gave your heart and soul to them. And again, I think we have to remember that doing that doesn't preclude also building a stable financial future, that we should be able to do that together.
That's it. That's it. Like, you shouldn't preclude it. If not now, when? And there are some things that you can say like, oh, I can push this back. And then there are some that you can't. And it's a very stressful part of life. For a lot of us, I think particularly as you enter your 30s and you maybe start thinking about having a family, and we know from a biological standpoint that there might be some limitations to what we can and can't do in terms of having families. And we feel this pressure to do it. And then we notice that the cost of living is increasing. The salaries have not kept up with it. So the ability to get to these points where we feel financially ready is getting further and further away, or marriage might be the same thing. And, how do you balance that good decision versus, if not now, when, and not trashing your finances by saying like, well, it's now or never kind of thing.
I think we don't ever have to really trash our finances. And I think it's really easy to look at this as all or nothing. But the truth of the matter is there's lots of shades of gray. And so, yes, it's very difficult. And I call this, YOLO versus deferred gratification continuum, right? How do we know, like, you only live once? Let's use our money, whatever resources we have, to enjoy the experience and live for today, versus how do we know when we should do the hard work, maybe grind it out a little bit, defer gratification, save money, put it away for some later date when we can use it? The truth of the matter is there's no specific answer to that, and it depends on who you are as a person. If we knew how much time we had on this earth, if we knew exactly when we were going to die, we could specifically spend money accordingly and make sure that we made it right to that last day and had just enough to do what we want to do. Unfortunately, we don't know that. So in my mind, the best thing I can do, and I think as you grow older and you become a little bit more adult and you have a little bit more money available to spend, what you really want to do is find a proxy for knowing how much life you have on this earth. And we don't really have one. So the best proxy I always tell people is, well, what scares you more as a person? Are you more scared that there are these things that you're passionate about, that are important to you, and that if you pass up the chance to do them today, you could die tomorrow and never get to them? Like, you're afraid you're going to, in a sense, die wealthy. You're going to have all this money and resources, but you're going to be so busy saving that you're not going to use it to live the life you want today. Is that what scares you most? Or on the other hand, are you on the other side of this? Some people are afraid that they're going to run out of money. So they're afraid they're going to spend too much money early and they're going to die old and broke because they're going to use up all their money and not have enough to live a long and fruitful retirement. So to me, trying to ask that question of yourself is a really nice proxy. Are you afraid that you're not going to live as well today and that time is going to pass you before you know it? Like Ernesto, who died in his 40s of leukemia, if he hadn't gone and tried to climb Mount Everest, if he hadn't lived for the moment there, he would have missed out on something really deeply important. On the other hand, I have tons of people I know and patients who lived into their 90s. And like my step grandfather was a dentist, and he did the traditional financial independence thing. He saved lots of money, put it in the stock market, and he retired at 48 and he died in his late 90s. Like, to him, he figured, I have a long time to live. I'm not worried about living for today. I'm worried about running out of money. So he wanted to be really careful, save up a lot of money and invest it wisely. So what I tell young people is, since we don't really know how to answer this question, you have to ask yourself what scares you most, and then you plan accordingly. If you're afraid that you're not going to really live for today enough, then you know what? You should take a lot of money and use that to live for today. YOLO a little bit, enjoy your experiences, be like Ernesto and go climb the mountain. But that doesn't mean you can't take 10 or 15% of the money you make and also put it away towards retirement. And if you do that consistently over the years, one of two things are going to happen. One is, God forbid, unfortunately, something bad may happen and you may die young, but then, hey, at least you were using your money to live a good life and you really lived it fully. Let's say that doesn't happen and you live to your 80 or 90. Well, it's true. You're not going to be retiring at 50. You might have to go to 60 or 65. But while you're working, you're going to be using your money to take great vacations and to YOLO a little bit. It's a pretty good life. So that isn't so bad. If you're, on the other hand, like my step-grandfather was, and you're worried about living a long life and you're worried about running out of money, well, then in that case, maybe you take 90% of the extra money you have and you put it towards retirement. And then you only take 10% of what you have left over and YOLO today with that 10%. And if you're right and you live a long time, you're going to get to financial independence, at least mathematically, way earlier, and then be able to live a really long retirement, a comfortable retirement. So there's no specific way, because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or next month or next year. All we can try to do is figure out what are our values and what scares us more. What do we have anxiety about? And then use that to make spending decisions today. And for each of us, that's going to be different. Some people are going to be comfortable spending a lot of their extra money because they want to make sure they get that good stuff in. Whilst other people are going to be more anxious about living a long retirement and they're going to save more. And that has something more to do with your values. And so if we get this sense of what purpose looks like in our life, what are our some days, we use that information to then build a path to financial independence via one of the brothers or multiple of them at different times. Then we can then start looking at, well, how do we spend today to best serve us? So I think it's a process where we have to look at all of this at the same time.
And I really like what you're saying about the certainty of what we know. So as a teenager, if you're watching this in high school, like you could say, like, I have potentially 4 to 5 lifetimes of what I've currently experienced in this world to still to go if I'm going to live to the average age of the US population right now. And that's a huge amount of time that I have to consider. And your priorities are going to change. Even just your thought and awareness of death as something that is a part of life, I think is so far away. I remember, like, as a teenager, I didn't, that never crossed my mind. Like, I'm immortal. Like, I will not die. And as I get older, like, I'm like, okay, I'm starting to notice that my body can't do what it used to when I was in my teens, and still not really thinking about death as an immediate concern, but certainly the things that I can do and the experiences I want to have while my body is able to do it are something that's coming to the forefront. So this will change over time. Like, we're not telling you that you need to get in the mindset of thinking about death right now and all the things you need to do before you die. Like, it's not about creating your bucket list and saying, I need to start crossing things off right now. It's also not saying that, live as if you could die tomorrow and, smash everything out that you can right now. You have to find that balance. And which, again, it comes back to that question, which of the brothers do you align with the most? And I wish I could promise myself, like, hey, if I work for 5 years and I just do nothing but work and I sacrifice and I grind, that I will be a multimillionaire at the other end of that and life is mine to do what I want with. If I knew that was a guarantee, that would be a very different conversation. But you could, in theory, grind, work really hard, sacrifice your relationships, your body, your mind, your health, and still not be at financial independence at the other end of that. And that's the risk you'd have to take. So setting yourself up for a journey that doesn't feel too grinding, too arduous, like, is probably one of the better pieces of advice we can give you, is that as long as you are enjoying yourself along the way enough that you're like, yeah, this is okay. This isn't too bad. Maybe I take a couple of detours like that middle brother, the vacations, the jobs that feel better to you. Like, you'll find that you don't mind being on the journey as much. And as long as you don't mind being on the journey, it really doesn't matter as much when you get there, which is kind of the nice thing. So I know for my wife and I, like, we make sure that we budget for things like vacations every year. We have things like a car replacement fund. We have home maintenance funds, things that are not necessarily needs, but we want to have these things in our lives. And we just make sure we budget for those along the way, on top of investing and building for that retirement that we really want to have as soon as possible, please. But we know that that's what we're thinking. Like, we want to retire as soon as we can, but we're okay with being on that pathway for as long as it takes to get there. And I think that puts us in a very comfortable mindset of, like, okay, if it's the stock market's up, great, it's getting closer. If it's not great, it's a little farther away, but that's okay too. Or if a job has to change, not a problem. And that's a very comfortable feeling to have. Okay, so if we were to think about the different pathways to getting to financial independence, what are some of the levers that we could pull to accelerate the path if we really wanted to? So if you were like, I want to get to financial independence as fast as possible, what would you do?
So again, it depends on how you define financial independence. So if we look at financial independence under the realm of having enough money to do what we're passionate about or what's purposeful for us. So ultimately, the fastest way to get to financial independence is find a job you love doing that can sustain you. And basically, in my brain, you're financially independent from day one. So you could be financially independent at the age of 25. Let's say you went to school, you want to be an engineer, you love electric cars like my son does, and you get a job with Tesla working on electric cars, and you're excited to go to work every day. In a sense, in my brain, as long as that job creates enough money for you to live sustainably, maybe put a little away, maybe buy some insurance and some things to protect yourself, in a sense, you're actually financially independent right away, in my opinion, right? So that's one way. Another way is, what I did is, I was very passionate about this idea of becoming a doctor, but once I became a doctor, I burned out very quickly and didn't love my job anymore. So what I did is I maximized income, right? So I found positions that paid me more. I worked slightly more hours. I took on some side jobs that I already was trained to do because I was a physician. And in a sense, that got me to a total net worth, an amount of money that I felt safe that I could really scale back at being a doctor when would have enough money to do that. And last but not least, so Again, the passion play, that's the youngest brother that goes just to do something they love doing, and that creates enough money. What I was talking about with being a doctor is I was starting to be like the eldest brother. I just wanted to make as much money, grind it out as possible so that I could leave. There's that in between ground, which is there are lots of ways to accrue wealth or start building an income for yourself that don't feel like grinding it out, and yet you're not amazingly passionate about. So I love talking about real estate when I talk about middle brothers. Like, you may not love real estate, but you may like it. And so over time, you may find ways to build up enough cash to put on a down payment to buy a number of properties. And then you rent those properties out to other people. And every month you get income or rents that get paid. And even after you take all that rent and you pay off your mortgages and you do everything you need to do, you may still have enough money left over to survive. And if you do that for a few years, you might be able to buy a few more houses or a few more buildings. And before you know it, you have a set of properties. Those properties kick off a certain amount of income, and that income allows you to live the life you want to live. It pays for your monthly needs. Maybe it allows you to put a little away, but you might find that you only have to put 5 hours a week towards maintaining those properties, or 5 or 10 hours a week, right? So that's very much a middle brother way of doing things. Another way would be you build a website or a blog and you monetize that, and you find that you have to put a lot of work on up front to build that website or blog, but eventually it starts running itself, and all you have to do is put a few hours a week in to keep it going, and you're making all sorts of money through revenue with advertisements and affiliates and things like that. So the truth of the matter is, if you want to get to financial independence quickly, there are a lot of ways to do it. Again, I would go back to this idea of, well, what is the purpose of financial independence in your life? What is it giving you the freedom to do? Let's think about what that is, and then we can start looking at how fast you really need to get there. Because if the purpose of all this is to do something that you actually can get paid reasonably to do, the answer might be to just get a job in that field of something that's really passionate for you. If that's not the case, like, I love podcasting. It's really hard to make tons of money podcasting. Some people can, but I certainly can't. So I like to podcast because I just enjoy it. If I found that the purpose of my life was to interview people and to have a podcast because I'm really passionate and love doing that, and I was at the beginning of my career, I would have a few different options, right? I could say, well, I'm classically trained as a doctor. Why don't I grind it out, work as hard as possible, put off podcasting for 5 years, make as much money as I need to, then I can stop being a doctor and just podcast. And if I make money or don't make money, it doesn't matter because I've saved up money. It's now invested. I could look at it that way. Or I could look at it another way. I could say, well, I'm exhausted by medicine and I don't want to work at 9 to 5 or 8 to 6 anymore. But because I'm a doctor, I have certain skill sets. Like, I can be a consultant. Like right now, I'm a consultant for a hospice company. I work 10 to 15 hours a week. It makes me some money, but not as much as if I was working a full practice. Maybe I can do some of these side hustles where I'm medical directors for some nursing homes, or do some things that don't take as much time, but creates enough cash that I can support myself. And then I have some free time and I'll start podcasting now as opposed to putting it off for 5 years. So that would be much more of a middle brother way of doing this. So it really depends. And it all comes back to is, what are your some days? What looks like purpose in your life? If we can figure that out, and that can change over time, and it doesn't have to be something that changes the world. It just has to be something that brings you some sense of passion and happiness. If we can find what those things are in your life, then we can start looking very clear-eyed at how you make money and what looks like a career to you. And we can start figuring out which brother or mix of brothers, because at different times in my career, I was acting very much like different brothers. We can figure out which works for you to help kind of fulfill you now and in the future. And I think that's really what it comes down to.
As you were telling these stories, I was thinking about the different types of financial independence, or the ways that we classify people who are financially independent. So the first one you described, where like you have a job that you really enjoy, like you are saying, like, I will have a source of income that will support myself in an area that I feel like I could work indefinitely in this job. Some things to watch out for are the kind of falsehood that we have that we can do a certain job forever, particularly if it relies on physical manual labor in some way, or mental capacity, or staring at screens. Like, there are different physical limitations that can come down the way that might force you to not be able to do that career anymore. And a lot of retirements are forced as opposed to by choice these days, which is something just to keep in mind, that you can plan to work forever, but your body may not necessarily allow for that. So you may have to be flexible in terms of the career you do as you move forward. I like to think of professional athletes who change positions as they grow older in their career. Like they can't just rely on the same skill set for their entire career. They have to adjust, grow, adapt to continue to play, into their long time career. The next one is this idea of coast-fi, which this is a point where you have accumulated enough wealth in your investments that you can stop contributing to it. And you can just say, whatever money I make now is mine to spend whatever way I want. My investments will grow over time. And when I get to that retirement point, they'll meet me there and there'll be enough for me to retire on. So I can't retire today, but I know given enough time and time to compound. So hopefully you've all seen compound interest calculators and the magic that happens with compound interest. You know that your wealth will be waiting for you when you get to whatever age is acceptable for you to retire. So that's called coast-fi. So that could be something you think about, like, all right, I'm 18, 19 years old. Let me go to work hard for the next 5 years. I'm going to live like a broke college student, keep my costs as low as possible, get my income as high as possible, invest as aggressively as I can, the money that I have, and then just slow down and start to enjoy life and know that you've done the front loading, the hard work in the beginning, and it will wait for you at the end. We just don't know exactly how long that'll be. And then you have things like lean fi, which is where you're like, so lean financial independence, where you've just about covered your basic core living expenses with what's invested. And you're like, I feel comfortable that I could potentially stop working now, but I'm not 100% sure. Fat fire is the opposite of that, where you keep working that little bit longer. You make sure that pot of money is so large that you are not going to have to worry about ever running out of money again. There are lots of different definitions of financial independence. Did I miss any that you're like, you've come across that?
No, slow-fi, coast-fi, fat-fi. I mean, they call things barista-fi, which is exactly coast-fi, this idea. You could get a job working in a coffee shop, but since you have enough money saved up, it's going to compound and pay for your retirement. There are all sorts of different flavors. What we're really talking about is lifestyle design, right? Again, instead of you working for your money, let's find a way for your money to work for you so that you can kind of design that lifestyle you ultimately want to live.
Okay. So moving into the Q&A part of this, one of my students, Ash, wanted to know, if I were going to say, yes, let's go for financial independence really hard right now, really fast, what advice would you give for the best way to do that? So if I'm willing to put in the work, if I'm willing to grind, and I'm not afraid of hard work, what would your advice be for getting there as fast as possible?
So this is basic mathematics, right? We know it is the gap, the difference between what you make and what you spend. There's a gap there. And the more that you can save and get it into some type of investment, I suggest the stock market because it's just easiest. The sooner you get that money and the more you can get in the stock market and allow it to compound, the less years it's going to take you to get to financial independence. So there are these wonderful tables that'll tell you based on how much of your income you save, how many years it'll take you to get to financial independence. So if you save 50% of what you make, that's going to get you to financial independence in a certain number of years. If you save 20% of what you make, that's going to get you a certain number of years, et cetera. So being able to save a large percentage of what you make is going to get you there fastest. The other thing, obviously, is going to be making more money, right? So looking at maximizing your income potential. So if you are like, I don't care, I'll do whatever it takes, I want to make a lot of money and get there fastest, those what you're looking at is, what are the highest paid professions? How do I get a high paid job within that highest paid profession? How do I move through the ranks, right? How do I get promotions and bonuses and those type of things? Can I add on a side project or a side hustle? So maybe I'm working, like when I was a doctor, I had my 9 to 5 practice, but then I started doing directorships and things on the side that I was trained for because I was a doctor, but it paid me a monthly stipend on top of what I made from seeing patients. So can I add some side hustles, some side jobs on? You can save your way to financial independence, but also remember that the amount of, you can only save so much, right? There's only so much money you can save, but the amount of money you can make is infinite. So if you really want to get there as fast as possible, start thinking about some ways that you can make money quickly. And again, for some people, that's going to be becoming a doctor, a lawyer, or accountant, something that pays a lot. For other people, it's going to be entrepreneurship. You're going to say, look, I don't know if I have it in me to go to 4 years of medical school and do 3 years of residency, but I really like building businesses, and I could build a website, or I could create a product, or I could build something and become an entrepreneur. So for some people, that's going to be the way. So some of it depends on your own abilities and skills. But, make a good salary, consider adding in some side hustles to make extra money, and then save as high a percentage as you can. And that will reliably get you to financial independence. I've seen people do it incredibly fast. So if you have this mindset at 18, the likelihood is, and you're interested in it, and you spend a little bit of time reading about it and paying attention, most people find a way to get to kind of their financial independence number by the time they're 30. If you start at 18 and you're real thoughtful. Now, again, if you go to college or if you go to graduate school, that's going to slow some things down, of course, but that's also going to allow you to probably make more money and save more in the end. So some of it really, again, depends on what feels important to you, or which path you want to take. But, a lot of people find a way to do it within 10, 12 years, especially if they're willing to be a little bit of frugal and pay attention.
Yeah, that brings to mind Cody Berman, who was a guest a couple months ago. So if you are looking at this video replay, it's probably going to be the video linked at the end of this. But Cody talked about passive income streams, and I think Cody is still in his 20s and has already reached that point of financial independence through very aggressive investing, keeping costs super low in the beginning, building up multiple streams through entrepreneurship. He left his full-time career to pursue entrepreneurship. I'm also reminded of a student I went to school with, and I'm done high school now. And I remember, had no interest in academics whatsoever, was very big into farming. And his choice after he left high school was to relocate to Australia, where they were offering 6-month contracts to go drive very large, heavy machinery in, I think, mining industries. And they paid amazingly for you to go do this. Like, if you can be location independent, you can be very flexible with what you do. You will find people who are willing to pay you for jobs that others just don't want to do, or don't have the abilities to do, or the flexibility to do, and they will pay you very well for it. So if you can be flexible, if you can keep yourself open and keep opportunities and doors open, you will find the ability to earn more is much higher than if you say, like, I need to find the highest paying career right where I am located right now because I have a family, I have obligations in my area, I have a mortgage that I have to pay off. So keeping yourself flexible, free, will probably increase your income earning potential as well. So just something to think about as you high school students are moving forward. Okay, Jordan, the last question I always ask my presenters is, what is the number one piece of advice you would give to high school students who are looking to build wealth in the future? So gathering all of your experience and knowledge and all these guests that you've had, patients you've experienced, if you were talking about just building wealth and the piece of advice you would give to students, what would it be?
So to me, it's pretty straightforward. Believe it or not, the building wealth part is actually fairly easy, and they're very prescribed ways to do it. The hard part is figuring out who you want to be and what feels like meaning and purpose in your life. If you can figure out what drives you, and again, it can change from time to time, and it doesn't have to be just one thing, and it doesn't even have to be important to the world, but what drives you, what brings you joy, what you like doing, I promise you, if you can figure those things out, building a financial future around them is probably not too hard. Money is a tool that allows us to do the things we want. Once we stop looking at it as a goal, something that we spend our whole life accumulating just to accumulate it, once we realize it's a tool to do the things we want, the hardest question then becomes is, what do I want? And I would argue that if you start thinking about the kind of things you want in your life, you don't need a big answer today, but just start getting an idea of what really drives you. I feel pretty confident that you'll be able to build one of these paths, whether it be the eldest brother, the middle brother, the younger brother, some mix of all of them. You'll be able to use some of these financial paths to get where you want to go, which is ultimately a fulfilled, happy life full of relationships and meaning. And so that's kind of what I'd like to leave you with.
I love that mini statement in there that was so important to me, at least, was that money is not the goal. Money is the tool that gets you to your goals, but it's not the goal. And figuring out your why and what you want your life to look like makes that money goal that much easier. And that goes for any goal you set. If you don't have a good why for doing it, it makes it very hard to do it. It makes it very hard to stick to it when times get tough, when it requires a little bit of sacrifice or grit to get there. So if you can give yourself a solid why for what you're doing, it's going to really help accelerate your path to whatever your goal is, whether that's financial independence or just a journey that feels great, that you're happy to be on that journey for your entire life. Jordan, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can students find you if they want to like follow your podcast, or they want to follow you on social media or learn more from you? Where can we find you?
So the easiest way is to go to jordangrumet.com. That's JORDANGRUMET.com. There you can see links to the 3 ways in which I pretty much create content. My financial blog, which is called Diversify, a medical blog, which I don't write it anymore, but I wrote from about 2004 to 2018, called In My Humble Opinion, and what I spend most of my time doing today, which is the Earn and Invest podcast. You can find links to all those there, as well as my book, Taking Stock, which talks about a lot of the things we talked about today. The easiest way, and there's also contact forms. So if you have a question, I respond to all of them. So just put something in the contact form and I'll write you back.
Okay, so yes, follow along whatever, I guess, method of learning you love the most, whether it's listening, whether it's reading, whether it's watching. And that goes for any of the presenters we've had, or any way that you like to learn. Make sure you're surrounding yourself with information and voices that resonate with you, give you a message that you feel confident in, and help you get to where you want to be. That's the key thing. Surround yourself with the people who are doing the things you want to do and are going to boost you in getting to where you want to be. All right, Jordan, thank you so much for your time. For those of you watching live and watching the replay, thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to hit subscribe to be alerted when other presenters come in and talk about personal finance in our classroom. Have a great rest of your day.